From the studios at WEAA-FM, Morgan State University, this is Jazz 101. We have talked to musicians, reviewed albums, discussed trends, and listened to some great music on Jazz 101. But tonight, we're going to chat about the industry. We have an insider here who will get his opinion on the climate of the music industry and the jazz music in particular. Matthew Barnhill is an award-winning marketing research with over 25 years of experience in the industry and brand management. Matthew was the Executive Vice President of Marketing Research of BET. He recently left BET to relocate to ATL, Atlanta, Georgia, and he is the President of ConsumerSense.com. We'll be chatting with Matthew Barnhill on Jazz 101 tonight. Thank you, Matthew, for joining Jazz 101.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
It's great to get a hold of you. You have been with BET for years, and you recently moved down to Atlanta to start your own business?
Yes.
And what was the reasoning that you decided to just chuck it and go down south?
Well, I have some southern roots. My family's originally from North Carolina, and I attended college in North Carolina undergrad, and knew that I wanted to get back south and have a slower pace of living and a little change in quality of life. Atlanta's a great market for consumer marketing, for research, for consumer goods overall, and it just felt like a great opportunity for me to take what I've learned at the BET Network and Proctor & Gamble and other companies along the way, do that for small businesses and nonprofits and try to help them understand who their audience is, develop some consumer insight so business owners can make smarter decisions and really fully understand their audience.
And how's that working out so far?
Great so far. I'm picking up clients and still pitching to businesses. I work for a number of organizations, both large and small, but I have a special place in my heart for small business and nonprofits because I think a lot of these organizations may think that market research is something that's only for larger companies or companies with deep pockets. That's not necessarily true. There's definitely some low-cost ways to listen to your consumers. And at the end of the day, we really want to empower business owners to make better decisions because you really, really understand your consumers' wants, needs, desires, etc. Everything is customized for clients, and I spend a lot of time with clients just understanding what's keeping them up at night. What are the things that they wish they knew? What are some of the decisions that they've made that perhaps they regret? And, how can we bring in their current consumers and or potential consumers to talk to them and learn better how that brand or company can interact with them. So rather than making assumptions around what an audience or target consumer wants, we say let's go to them directly and ask them and figure out what are the next steps for your organization. Whether you've launched a product or a service or you're just in the beginning phases, we can really help you figure out what that consumer proposition really, really is and what are some of the key elements that you have to knock out in order to develop your consumer base.
We are going to switch gears a little. I'm talking to artists and I'm talking to people within the industry, and they're basically talking about two different things. They're talking about them being as a musician and then them about the business. And we talk about the business and how they strategically try to get their material out. And in your case, you've seen the industry from a different perspective, and I'd really like to get your thoughts about what you think where we're at right now with the music industry.
Well, you're absolutely right in terms of there being so many ways to get music, to interact with music, to sample music. And I think part of the challenge is how that all is measured. What are the metrics by which we gauge success? Traditionally, we look to SoundScan or record sales for a mark of success. But with social media and a number of ways to interact with music, that probably doesn't make sense anymore. So, I think the industry overall has had a challenge in trying to figure out what is the new norm and how do we measure it? How do we talk about it? So, is it engagement? Is it, festival attendance? What are, these kind of marks that we look to figure out how we talk about the business? And as of yet, that nobody's really settled on anything in terms of a common language. So I think that is confusing. And then I think that we also have evolved into a society overall where labels may not necessarily be a good thing. And while we can label things to make it easy for us to understand, you mentioned the blurring of the lines. And so, with Kendrick Lamar or with the Robert Glasper or, artists of that ilk, would it be considered hip-hop, R&B, jazz, et cetera, or does it even matter? A lot of research shows that the younger audience or millennials tend to shy away from labels. They just like what they like. Mm-hmm. And I think that the industry is still challenged or is very challenged to find out how or to figure out how to talk about it.
That's a really good point. I mean, we used to use Arbitron as the major gauge as to what trends are, but that I think they're having a difficult time really tracking what people's interests are.
Yeah, and even how we interact with music, can differ by generation. So, you have, let's say an older consumer who may be traditionally used to going to their local mom and pop record store to purchase jazz or, going to a jazz club, et cetera. But perhaps the younger side is, streaming it or sampling it or listening to up-and-coming artists on SoundCloud or, going to festivals and discovering new people, and they're both fans of similar types of music, but it's very hard to equitably capture all of that energy. And so, it's hard to get a full snapshot or a full picture, if you will, of the industry and of the list.
You brought up some really great points, and I didn't really know that you would go in this direction, but there are advertisers out there on the regular radio, and the playlists are so tight because they know that these couple songs are enjoyable. They've been tested well, and they've been well received, and they're doing well in the charts or whatever. But there's so much more out there, and I think it just turns people off to the regular radio because they're not able to enjoy what they enjoy. So they're going elsewhere. They're going off the radio grid, and they're going elsewhere to find really what works for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I really believe that, much like with kind of mainstream, pop and R&B artists, the money really is in touring these days. And as a result, I think you're going to continue to see festivals and concert attendance increasing and, fragmenting even more. And so, there used to be a couple of really big festivals, and now, every city has multiple festivals all summer long, or, you may have a festival that fuses multiple genres. And so you may have, a rock fan suddenly listening to something that may be historically considered jazz because that artist is performing at that venue. So there are lots of ways to sample, lots of ways to interact with artists, not to mention, following them on social media and interacting with them on social media. But there are so many more venues and ways to get in touch with music, to feel it, to experience it. And one of the other things that we know about millennials specifically is, they are very, very, very music savvy and very big consumers of music. And so it's a major driver, probably more so than other age groups. And so, the passion is there, the interest is there. But can the category find a way to appeal to them, to keep them engaged, and, even find ways to contribute their own spin on it? A lot of the intrigue or interest in social media is it allows people to produce or share their points of view on things. And so is there a way for, jazz or other genres of music to really provide young people that opportunity to kind of see it through their eyes, help discover it through their lens?
So I think it's to be continued at this point, but we're just moving forward, and we realize that the music industry isn't dead. It's just morphing into something completely different.
Absolutely.
If you're
as is media overall, that goes for television, and the film industry as well. It's not just music.
Yeah, I find in my generation, and I am older, a lot of my peers are saying that, music is dead and it's not as good as what it was at the time period when they were younger. And I just kind of disagree with that.
Whenever you hear, the so-and-so industry or the so-and-so category is dead, your ears should absolutely perk up and try to understand what that means. To me, in this particular case, when I hear you say, music is dead or jazz is dead, I am the son of a retired music educator. My dad taught in Calvary County, Maryland for decades. And I remember as a child in the 70s and 80s hearing that jazz was dead. Well, here we are 2017, decades later, it's not dead. It's changing, but it's not dead. So you have to be very, very careful of that. It reminds me a lot of when you hear people talk about, when I was a little kid, the music was so much better.
Yeah, exactly.
This and that. Mm-hmm. And this is just kind of the updated version of that. The industry's not dead. The category's not dead. It's more. It's different, and it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, it's a very, very exciting time, actually.
Yeah, it's inherent upon us to figure out how to harvest it, how to make it grow organically, how to keep people interested in it.
If you have just joined us, you're listening to Jazz 101. My guest tonight is Matthew Barnhill. He is the president of ConsumerSense.com and previously was an executive vice president of marketing research of BET. And we're talking about the music industry tonight. Let's switch to BET. That channel has also changed and morphed into different things from the time that you started to the time you left, I would say, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Back in the day, there was videos, and now there's really their focus is on having their own brand of series and content.
Yes, they definitely shifted to original content. It's one of those things where music videos became ubiquitous, and so what was going to be more appealing to consumers? Sitting down at a predetermined time and date to watch music videos, or being able to pull it up on streaming services, whenever you really want to see it. And it became a lot harder for music video content to remain competitive, ratings-wise. Shows about music can definitely work, but in terms of the core music video, after the heyday of MTV, VH1, BET, and others being able to play blocks of videos, those days are gone, and fans, certainly leverage technology to get that content.
I thought BET really had an opportunity at one point to really hash out some heavy topics that concern the community, and they kind of shied away from that. What do you think the reason was for that?
I wouldn't say BET shied away from it. I think they experimented with news in various mediums, both on air and online. But at the end of the day, it's a business, and it's hard to compete with networks who are not doing that kind of content, and may have more salacious or more inviting content, and you are in a place where you're doing, let's say, something heavy, and unfortunately, folks may not show up to watch. So, I actually had, a great purview in terms of being able to see the ratings, on a daily basis for BET and competitive networks. And unfortunately, the numbers just simply weren't there with some of the heavier, meatier content. Now, that's not to say that that content can't work. I just think it's a big challenge to figure out how to make it work with the right audience, with the right brand, et cetera. And I've been encouraged recently by some of the work going on at Florida A&M University around trying to establish a Black news network. It's not the first time that this type of initiative has been studied, but it appears as though, in the post-Obama world that there, and I guess the Trump world, that there's a much more voracious appetite for news, on demand. Look at the great work that Roland Martin's doing on TV One, and with his show, and I think there may be some traction, but even then it's when we would talk to viewers of news content, many of them felt like the local news was much more important to them than kind of a national news story. So you're always still going to be competing against what's happening in my neighborhood versus what's happening, kind of on a national or global scale.
Now, I have a theory, and this is mine, and I want you to either to say it's correct or discount it and tell me it's wrong. Back in right around 1999, Arbitron, made a suggestion that the industry is leading more towards Latin music. And that was where we got Ricky Martin. That's where we got Jennifer Lopez and Mark Anthony and Enrique Iglesias. And that was a switch where the smooth jazz stations that were successful in many, many markets that maybe had a higher demo, the demo was not as desirable, were switched over to Latin channels, only to find out that the industry really wasn't geared towards Latin channels anyways. Now that's my theory, and I have no proof other than what I've read in Billboard at the time. And as an insider, let me know: am I off, or am I way off, or am I a little close?
It's a complicated situation. Yes, with the growth of the Hispanic population, there, and rightfully so, was a lot of attention paid to this consumer market, and I think that part of it really was a lot of advertisers and media entities who may not have had Hispanic Americans on their radar at all. So suddenly, there was a strong interest to get in on this hot emerging market where this audience already existed in the U.S. and was substantial. It just it was packaged and kind of shown as a huge growth market. And so, rightfully so, a lot of people shifted attention. But, if you don't understand the culture, if you don't understand the drivers, if you don't really spend time talking to the audience to understand what it is they want, you're going to miss the mark. And so, that everybody rushing, or a lot of people rushing into that space, I have to question some of the intent, and whether it really was to serve the audience or if it was just chasing the next dollar, basically. The thing about, if you look, today, Hispanic Americans and African Americans, if each of those entities or communities formed their own economy based on spending alone, they would tie as the 15th largest, government in the world in terms of spending power. So you're talking about a lot of spending power. I mean, you can't say enough about the need to target both Hispanic Americans as well as African Americans. But you have to make sure that you do your homework and that you really understand what the audience really wants, what the audience will allow you to do, how far will the audience allow you to go under that specific brand. So, to answer your question, I think that definitely was a big part of it. And I think that some people or some media outlets and advertisers, may have dropped the ball in terms of really trying to reach that audience.
Yeah, and I believe it's Clear Channel. Clear Channel basically owned the majority of the radio stations. Now they're iHeartRadio, and the smooth jazz channels basically automated. So they were really easy to manage. You didn't really need to have a local presence there, and I think that was probably one of the reasons. It just didn't feel like a true connection, like they were connecting with them.
Absolutely, and that's one of the one of the more fascinating things to kind of see in both African American advertising and Hispanic advertising. Just because you want to reach a specific segment doesn't necessarily give you the right to or the permission to. What we've seen in research time and time again is that these audiences definitely respond to advertisers that they feel are vested in their best interest or in their community. So, there's a connection piece that, I can't emphasize enough. That's absolutely critical. And if you don't do your homework, if you don't figure out what are those trigger points, your plans will likely suffer. You have to build a relationship with the audience. You can't just turn on a light and say, "We're here, come by us."
You were looking at research, and you ran that research division in BET. What were some insights that you had that shocked you, or were excited to share with us?
I have to say I'm an old school researcher. I've talked to hundreds of thousands of consumers across the world in all demographics. So nothing really surprises me anymore, to be honest with you, with data. But I think one of the interesting pieces that I shared earlier was just about the real unique relationship that millennials have with music, and you actually see a lot of differentiation by ethnicity. So that relationship with music is even stronger with African Americans and Hispanic millennials than what people may call general pop. So there's a real mark there where African Americans and other multicultural millennials have even a stronger bond with music, and music plays a much bigger role in their lives. Another thing I think is just how another piece of research I think that was interesting to me, at least, was a few years ago we did a study called the Black Family Study, and we looked at how people classify themselves and think of themselves and as a family unit. And what we found was, many people don't buy into or don't subscribe to the government classification of families. So, when you hear stats like, single parent household or single mom, stats around that, they don't necessarily see themselves as that. They may be in a loving relationship, but for whatever reason, the government may classify them as one way, but they see their lives as something different. So that was pretty interesting understanding or listening to people talk about who they are and how they see their families versus the government construct or, the Census Bureau construct of what determines or how to determine or classify a family structure. So, just kind of one watch out there whenever you hear some of those stats. Just because they're classified one way by the government doesn't necessarily mean that that's how people see themselves.
Wow, that's interesting. And I don't know if the census will ever be caught up to the way people see each other, and the way that we collect data on that in that level.
Well, when you're still having conversations about, whether the word Negro is appropriate for the census form,
I gotcha.
How far the battle goes. Now, having said that, I know some of the folks at the Census Bureau, and they do amazing work, and a lot of that data is very helpful for funding purposes, for, research purposes, et cetera. So, I won't say get hung up on, classification names, et cetera, because, I think the good, is great overall. Like what they're doing is great. But, you kind of have to make sure that you really pay attention to what metrics are being used, how they're defined, et cetera, to make sure that you understand it as, a reader or as a listener of data.
I'm going to leave you just with one piece of gossip, if you're able to do that for me. In your relationship with BET, you must have met with a lot of celebrities and have opinions on how they behave. Could you give me a name of the person that was the awesome one and the one that was the worst? Don't tell me who's who. Just say these two people, and then we have to figure out who it is.
You know what? I have no problem telling you who awesome is. There's some really, really great people out here. I think the world of Ludacris, phenomenal stand-up guy. He's just, a great guy. And I am a big fan of who he is. I also have to say Tamia is, one of the sweetest people that I've ever met, and just genuinely enjoy being around them. LL Cool J, class act, again, think the world of them. These are people who, if their folks were to call me right now, I'd jump in a heartbeat to support them or help them. They just are genuinely good people. On the negative side, my friends know the story, so I definitely can't share, names or anything. But, a lot of folks, when they, get nominated for awards or start, getting hot, sometimes they, tend to think of themselves as being untouchable or invincible. And so I have definitely have several artists who have pulled back from or stopped being a fan of because of their behavior and habits.
Thank you very much for your time today, Matthew. There was a great time speaking with you.
Pleasure.
We are talking to Matthew Barnhill. He is joining us at Jazz 101. Jazz 101 is recorded at Morgan State Radio. It's WEAA-FM. The producer of the show is Tyron Rice. WEAA is your source of cool jazz and more. And thank you all for listening tonight.